Thank you so much, Will, and thank you all for joining me today. We have a great topic planned on a practical guide to product launches. So let's get started. Just a little bit of context about me. I'm a Chicago native, born and raised. So anybody from Chicagoland, hello. I'm currently reside in the western suburbs. I have over 10 years experience in product management, and I've worked across multiple industries, delivering and building products in the recruitment industry, fintech, and currently marketing automation. I did spend some time as a group PM managing a team of product managers. And throughout my career, one of the things I've done is continue to mentor junior product managers in things like stakeholder management, presentations, data analysis, and road mapping skills. Outside of work, I am a mom. I have a 14-year-old that is just about to start high school, so do wish me luck. And also, I am very into the health and fitness category. And so I'm actually a certified personal trainer and group fitness instructor. So outside of my already busy schedule, I also train clients in the evenings. If you do want to find me on LinkedIn after this, my handle is at KaleFit827. So we've got a lot to talk about today regarding product launches. And honestly, it's taken me a lot of years of practicing and launching different things to learn really the best methods and approaches to really launching products successfully. And it's really my hope at the end of the day today that whether you are interested in getting into product or you're a veteran in the space, that this insight that I provide today will just kind of be your guide as you look at the next feature that you go to launch. So, as a product manager, we know that products that are launching can be really exciting, right? But at the same time, they can also be a super source of stress. As a product manager, we are empowered, but at times it can honestly feel like we're holding the weight of the world on our shoulders. So, when we have a successful product launch, everything comes up roses, right? It's blue skies, your customers are happy, your team is happy, your company is happy. Everyone involved is a part of the celebration. But unfortunately, this isn't always the case. Sometimes a launch can go sideways or worse, turn into a dumpster fire, right? And there could be a many reasons that this happens, whether it's through failed adoption, there's not enough testing, maybe it doesn't meet customer or leadership expectations. And when this is happening, nobody is celebrating, right? And unfortunately, we as PMs end up getting all the blame. So let's dig into a little bit why product launches typically fail. This is not an inclusive list, but these are generally the top 5 reasons that I've encountered in the past. And hopefully, I can give you some tools so that we can avoid these in the future. First one is there's not enough research done to identify your target market. Knowing not only what you're building, but who you're building it for is absolutely critical in the successful launch and for you to continue to see adoption of that product. Perhaps your product isn't fulfilling a customer need or pain point. Sure, at the end of the day, new features and products are great, but if there really isn't a need for them with your customer base, then it's going to get really hard to be able to actually get people to use it and adopt it going forward. Another big one is that your customers don't know it exists or how to use it. So you can have the coolest feature out there or coolest product out there that you shipped, but if nobody knows it exists or it's way too complicated to understand, you're really not going to have that adoption that you hope for upon that launch. Another reason is it's got flaws or bugs. So you may have nailed the target market, you have this great high in demand product, but at the end of the day, if there are some major issues that come up out the gate, you're going to lose those customers and potentially lose the risk of ever having them come back, and your adoption is going to take a big hit. And the last typical reason that product launches can fail is that the price point is too high. So, this again really comes down to knowing your target market, understanding the value that they see or perceive in the product or feature that you're trying to ship, and what they're actually willing to pay for it, and finding the middle line there. So, when it comes to ingredients for success for a product launch, hands down, it's proper planning, communication, and execution. Okay, if that's the only thing I have you remember today, it's proper planning, communication, and execution. So let's take a look into some types of different product launches that you'll likely encounter at some point in your career. We'll talk a little bit about the big shebang, so those net new products. These are your biggest type product launches. We'll also touch on adding additional features or functionality to existing products. And then we'll touch on the element of redesign. So, our first case, we'll talk about net new product launches. So, some just brief examples of this is maybe you introduced a new marketing channel for your marketers to use. Maybe now they can send SMS or push. Or maybe you're introducing a brand new social collaboration platform. Example I have here is Threads. Or maybe there's a new product that you're looking to introduce to market in an existing product line. With the new product launch, it is critical that you begin thinking about this launch from day one. I'm talking about as you're even putting together that product concept doc, you should really be thinking about the end in sight, right? So, what does adoption look like to you? Really trying to define, like, what do you think good looks like when this product comes to launch? How are you actually planning on rolling this feature out? A lot of this should be thought up in front so that you can ensure that if it's a high risk or there's any risk involved, you've thought out the plan for that successful rollout. And then also your communication plan is key. How do you plan to communicate this new product out to your customers? When do you plan to communicate this product out to your customers is important. Additional things that you really want to nail when you're looking to gather information around your product launch and start to plan that is who's your target market and making sure you really nail that and the positioning to them. Most likely, this will involve if you're so privy to have a product marketing person to work with. And then, how will your users find out about this product? What do you plan to do? How early do you plan to start to advertise it? Is this a paid or free feature? And if so, are you going to offer some type of free trial to try to get new users on board? What do you what do you need to do to actually train people on this? I focus on internally because as a product manager, you're not alone in this, right? It's your entire company that needs to be on board for a product launch to be successful. So you need to make sure that all internal teams involved, from sales to implementation to support to marketing to even legal and finance, are well aware of this product early in advance. They've had a chance to familiarize themselves about it. They know how it operates, so they could also be champions when it comes time to launch. Thinking through proper documentation is going to be key throughout all these product launches. You really want to be able to make sure your internal teams are prepared so that once that product launches, if questions start to come in from customers, they are prepared to be able to handle that and it's less escalation toward you as the product manager. And even before that, if you provide the right type of documentation up front to your customers, you may even avoid some of those unnecessary calls in. Then you consider things like how are you going to roll it out? Are you going to have a beta period? Are you going to do a rolling GA? So you're going to stagger your rollout maybe by geography or a different type of demographic? Or is it a big shebang and you're just going to unlock it for everybody? And then really understanding what good looks like to you so you have something to measure against. Like, what do you anticipate the actual adoption of this new product is going to be out the gate? And as time goes on, what do you anticipate that adoption to look like? So, something I really want to touch on here is that I highly recommend leveraging a cross functional team throughout the development of this new product. And some companies are lucky enough to have some of this in place today. It could be a go to market team, or I've heard it called tiger teams before. But if there's not one that exists in your organization, I want you as a product manager to feel empowered to create one, right? This success of this product is really going to benefit your company and it'll help you in the process too. So, gathering folks from all areas of the business, getting them in a room, getting them on a call, beginning to familiarize them with what you're trying to do, they're going to help you. It ultimately takes a village to launch a successful product. So, let's look at some examples. I'm going to walk you through a product launch success and a failure. So, our first example is a success. We'll talk about Robinhood. So, Robinhood, if you're not familiar, is a commission free trading app and it launched in 2013. The unique selling point of Robinhood was that it was $0 commission trading. So, what made Robinhood successful out the gate was that they managed to get almost 1 million users before they even launched the app. That's incredible. And so, what really worked and how did they get this success? Well, at the end of the day, if you remember in the failure reasons, they nailed knowing their target market. They understood the existing pain points that their target market had with other trading apps, and they used that to their advantage. In addition to that, they created an excellent user experience where it was super simple with a sign up form and it had a powerful hook. That's what made this one a success. But on the flip side, let's take a look at Google Glass. Now, Google Glass was a wearable voice and motion controlled Android set of glasses. Main value prop here was it was innovative and cool. It was one first on the market for this, and it launched back in 2013. The problem once Google Glass launched was one, it faced battery lifespan issues, which any of our technology users know that that is not something we and generally enjoy having to be attached to a cord when we're trying to use something. And second point was that it really wasn't hitting the mark with in terms of the functionality that it provided. On top of that, it was offered at a really steep price tag of $1,500, keeping in mind this was 2013 at the time. So as a result, it ended up being discontinued less than 2 years later in 2015. The moral of the story here is really understand your target market and understand that their needs and what they're willing to pay for those needs.
Hey, Kim, we actually have a quick question from Lauren.
Sure.
You'd like to know what can we anchor to when it comes to hypotheses for that success baseline?
Um, what can you anchor to for success baseline? You're going to have to do some research on that to determine it. It's going to be different for every product. I would generally say take a look in general at the other products that you've seen that are similar and what type of adoption rate that they expect. I'd also evaluate if there's a cost associated, what kind of numbers do you need to reach in order for you to hit a success rate and make that actual time and money that you put around it worth the squeeze there? And you may have to flex on that number. What's important to see is you can have that number, but it's not static and it can change. So you don't have to set it and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't make that number. You're going to learn and grow as it evolves, and don't be afraid to adjust that as you learn more. And the purpose of doing that would be to have like some type of beta period or do thorough user research and testing so that you could further validate and feel good about that initial success metric you set. All right. So let's move on to the next type of product launch, which is adding features to an existing product. Now, this may not seem as big of a need to have a big product launch around, but I urge you to use caution here because it is very important for a couple different reasons. First off, when it comes to an existing adding features or something like that, some examples, pretty simple, might be something lightweight, like you added dark mode preview for your emails. Or maybe you added some additional alert monitoring functionality. You added a new configuration setting to your already preset configuration page. Problem here is you really want to do due diligence to identify early, first off, everything involved. You want to make sure that you're speaking and networking with all the different product teams and areas of your organization to make sure that by introducing this feature, you're not potentially breaking something else or there's not a gap in it. Like, for instance, if you add an existing configuration in one space, but you're not able to see that in another area of your application. Or maybe you add an existing data point, but it doesn't flow through to the reporting or the data integrations that you have, and customers aren't able to leverage that. So really think about when you're adding features, it's more than just within your box of your product. Think about the whole ecosystem when you're working on those. So also something to consider with adding new features is there any change management, right? Is there any data migration involved? What impact on the user experience might you have by introducing this new feature? And one of the biggest pieces here is how are you going to tell customers about this new feature? If you remember in our failures, one of the examples there was customers don't know it exists or how to use it. So you could add this really cool functionality, but then you're wondering after you launch it, you're like, why is nobody using it? It could be a case that it's not discoverable enough, and so maybe doing more research around like, can users find it is something you want to look into. But really thinking about how you kind of hype that feature up and introduce it to your customers is going to be key. Let's look at an example here. This time we're going to look at an example of a product fail, the Samsung Note 7. So this was the sixth iteration of the Galaxy Note smartphone, and it launched in 2016. So what went wrong with this was that shortly after its launch, reports started coming in of literally the battery catching fire. That's a pretty big deal, right? And because of that, Samsung was forced to recall 2.5 million Note 7s, and it cost them close to $9.4 billion in sales. That is not just a little chunk of change. And so, what you can learn from this failed example, and again, I don't know their exact rollout strategy or plan or metrics, but it may be very exciting to launch something out. You may be wanting to get it out there because of speed to market and just be new in the space, but take your time to think about the quality that you're providing, even in that initial launch. Testing is absolutely critical. And now you may not always be as lucky to have like a big QA team to test it, in which case, do as much testing as you can on your own, but use your customers initially as a testing ground as well. Have a beta so that that's a great place to be able to find loopholes and flaws. One note I will say about a beta is just make sure it is of good size. I oftentimes see folks have betas that are like 3 or 5 customers, while for some things that might be totally okay and will give you a good gut feel if you're in the right direction. Oftentimes that's a little bit too small to be able to identify exactly any of these issues that might be coming on or all the use cases that you might not have thought of initially when you were designing the product or the feature. All right, let's take a look at the last type of product launch. This is a redesign. So maybe you're introducing a new skin on your campaign creation, or you redesign reporting and dashboards experience, or maybe you updated and gave a whole facelift to your configuration page. So the what's super exciting when it comes to redesign is being able to take, some type of clunky UI or outdated product and make it look nice and shiny and new. And there's definitely an excitement about wanting to get this out to customers. You're like, wow, this looks so much better. They're going to love it. I would say proceed with caution with some redesigns. Understand the impact that the redesign will have on your customers. Did you move anything around in the process of this redesign, right? Did you change anything in the scope as you were creating this redesign? The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, change is hard. You know this as yourself. You generally get used to the way you do things, you get used to the way things are, whether they are totally clunky or not. You have a system and you become efficient at that system. When you flip the script and offer something new, although it might be better in the long run, it is really hard to bring your users along from day one. So it's very critical as part of that, you think about a change management plan early on. How are you going to bring these customers or existing users into this new experience? What type of onboarding experience are you going to provide? Oftentimes, if you're building a SaaS product, there's lots of tools like Pendo, et cetera, where you could do like guided walkthroughs that'll really bring your users along and help point them in the direction of where maybe their new favorites went or how they can best use your feature now that it's been redesigned. Also consider your strategy for rollout and if you're going to allow any rollbacks if people just totally protest your design, how do you plan to handle that? And how is your support plan to handle that as well is an important piece. So an example that we'll use here is Slack. So for those of you unaware of Slack, it's a messaging app that basically connects people to information they need. So Slack released a new design in August 2023. Many of you that are Slack users probably are very familiar with this. Their main objective of this redesign was to help users stay productive and focused. They had done a redesign previously back in 2020. And since then, they added a bunch more features and functionality, but the discoverability of those features became pretty hard to find. And also, as anybody will attest to with Slack, notifications management can become overwhelming quickly. So really, they wanted to provide with this redesign a better way to focus on uninterrupted work and provide visibility into key features like reminders and later. And so what Slack did to roll this out was they did a rolling release of the new UI. What was an interesting part and why I consider this a trade-off is when it comes down to that whole scenario of what do you do if your customers or users just revolt immediately against this new change. Slack took an interesting choice by not allowing users to revert back to the old UI. I know personally, I was a little bit frustrated about this when it first came out, and I quickly tried to see like, how can I revert back? I was so used to using the form and was a little bit dismayed to find that I couldn't roll it back. But they had a clear vision and intention for why they didn't want you to roll back. With rollbacks, it's kind of like teetering a fine line. While you give joy to your customers immediately because they're able to go back to what they were doing before, now you have a harder challenge because they've already seen it, and now you got to move them into there because you know you want everybody into that new redesign at some point. So, what Slack did that worked really well in this case, even though there was some contention with not being able to roll back and moving some of the elements around, that rolling release allowed them to respond to feedback and they were open to it. So, they found early on that there was discontent from those that used the multiple workspace feature. And so they were quickly able to adjust the product and add in a quick access point and unblock some of that discontent and proceed with their rollback. So that's a great strategy when it comes to actually thinking about product launches, especially if there's a high risk involved of some level, is to think about staggering your rollout. And the best reason for this is it allows you to mitigate some of the potential issues by identifying them quickly in the process, allowing you to either pause the rollout to make changes or proceed with caution in a more calculated way. So, as I've touched on, it all comes down at the end of the day to proper planning, communication, and execution. If we take a look at the key elements to a successful product launch, there are a few, right? It starts with that vision and strategy. Set a clear vision and strategy for what you intend this product to do, or this feature update, or this redesign. Why are you doing it? Then identify the who. Who is this for, and what are their needs, pain points? What are the use cases around that? Make sure you start to establish some success metrics. What does good look like at the end of the day once this launches? Where would you like it to be? Where would it make you happy? Make sure you spend that time to educate and collaborate with internal teams. It's super important to the success of your product launch. Create awareness early and often. Whether that's internal awareness or that's external awareness, sending out something that maybe pops up that says coming soon in 3 months is my feature and then never touching on it again. People don't are busy, right? They don't always see that. So they might need more constant reminders of things that are coming so that they can mentally prepare and that change management goes smoother. And then at the end of the day, it's all about executing that rollout plan that you developed, hopefully long before. So I just wanted to bring up this slide because I think it's important to remember that as a product manager, you are not alone in your launch. You have a whole team and village that are behind you that you need to be working with to really ensure that this product launch is a success and remains a success as customers go to adopt your product. This could be everywhere from sales. They really need to know how they're going to sell this and how they're going to pitch it to prospects. Implementation is going to need to know how they're actually going to onboard people into this new experience and how it works. You're going to have to make sure that there's enough customer support. So if there's issues, they know exactly how to troubleshoot those issues. And of course, legal is good to bring in always, just as an oversight for compliance reasons, and various other parties like finance, marketing for positioning, and of course, your documentation. So this list is going to be available. Will will send it out with the recording afterwards. There'll be a link to it. There's also a published article on LogRocket with product launches that has this. This is just a screenshot. You can get an editable version after this call. But basically what this is I would recommend using this again if you're new to product or if you're even if you're a veteran as like a gut check. It's just to make sure we're all busy, that we're actually checking the boxes of the process that we need to launch our product successfully. And if anything, this is just a good overview and a reminder, just in case you might have forgotten a step along the way if it's been a while, maybe since you've launched a product. The last thing I want to mention is that now you've launched the product, it doesn't just stop there, right? Like just when you're building a product, it's the end to end solution. That's the same thing to think about with the launch. What is that end experience? What you want to do is remember those success metrics that you set at the beginning. You want to track them. You want to track that adoption, not only just when you release the feature or the product, but 30 days after you release it, 60 days, 90 days. How is that adoption going? Is it growing? Is it what you anticipated? Also, you want to make sure that there's some way to monitor feedback, whether that's, a feedback button on your product or it's reviews online, or you have some maybe more individual sessions with some of your customers that are using it. Be ready to monitor that feedback regularly and adjust accordingly if you need to. And then ensure any fast follows because oftentimes we're trying to ship things as quickly as we can. We want to get the MVP out there and we'll cut corners occasionally just to get things out on a timely basis. But make sure that any of those critical fast follows are prioritized and shipped as soon as possible. Thank you so much. This is all I have on product. I'm going to turn it over to Will and team for a little bit more.
All right, and I'll make this quick so we can pass it back over to Kim for the Q&A. But today's webinar was brought to you by LogRocket, and we actually just went through something of a product launch ourselves. So I'll just tell you quickly about that. We've been operating in the session replay and product analytics space for quite some time. And something that we continued to hear from the market is that a lot of these tools are too reactive in nature to be helpful. For example, with session replay, if you know you have a problem from a user complaint or some other source of knowledge, it's super helpful for investigating what's going on. But people don't necessarily know where to look to find meaningful insights. And a lot of us are recording way too many sessions to comb through them by hand and find anything interesting. On the other hand, analytics are super useful for identifying directional trends, but oftentimes by the time you can see something in your analytics platform, that means your KPIs are already suffering, and it's essentially too late to stop all of the damage. So Galileo AI is designed to proactively identify meaningful user insights. The way it works is our AI scans your session replay data. So it's basically as if you had a full-time product analyst that's just able to watch sessions and identify meaningful trends in usage and meaningful issues. And it will actually use machine learning to describe its findings in simple, easy to understand language. For example, it might tell you something like users are unable to add an item to the cart without adding a membership number or something along those lines. So if this sounds interesting, I'll include a link to a free trial in the follow-up email along with Kim's checklist. And thanks everyone for listening to me talk here. And then I'll pass it back over to Kim for the Q&A. There's actually a couple already in the bin here. I think you kind of alluded to this first one when answering Lauren's question, Kim, but Pravdamir asks, how do you go about quantifying the commercial opportunity for a new product launch?
Oh, that one is interesting. So that one would be basically while you're doing your potential analysis on what that feature could actually or that new product could actually bring to market. I think it highly depends on what you're using. Me personally, how I'll quantify what that's going to be is based on user demand or request for it. So oftentimes I can do a little bit of competitive research and get an idea of where it sits in the space. But oftentimes, when it comes to for my company on what value it may provide, I'll take a look at some of our internal system or internal tools, like typically we use Salesforce, right? And try to understand how much ARR is attached to client requests for a similar type of feature. And that's how I can kind of tie how much value add that this feature could potentially have for the product.
Cool. And then from Patrick, he'd like to know what's a good size for a beta group? Does it depend on the feature, or how would you think about that?
Yeah, that's there's no one size fits all answer. Again, it's like how big of a net are you casting with this feature, right? Is it something that everybody's going to have, or is a certain feature where only a portion of your client base actually would be using it or is eligible to use it, right? And from there, I don't know if there's a right size answer to tell you like 10%. I mean, there is science that you could get it to be like a statistical significant number. I would just say broad enough that you've covered a variety of the use cases that you've identified for that product or feature, and that you feel comfortable enough with the feedback that you're getting from the beta. You could start small and see how it goes. And then if you feel like, hey, maybe we should expand this out a little bit more, what I've done that's really intriguing about that is I've started with smaller betas, and then as I felt that they were more like GA ready features, instead of just fully releasing to GA, I've just extended the beta. So maybe I started with a private beta just to validate that this was even the right thing we built, and then opened it up to a public beta and tried to source more people from there. And then from there, just continued to grow it until I got to a point that I felt confident enough to release it to everybody.
Cool, makes perfect sense. And then Pablo asks, what are the phases to cover to develop a solid go-to-market strategy for a launch?
So that checklist that will be provided will drastically help you with the different phases. It kind of breaks up kind of what you should be thinking about in the different subset categories, starting with pre-development or within that development phase, and your initial research, going on to as you get closer to that product launch, going on to right before you launch, kind of like that gut check last list of things. So I'd highly recommend taking a look at that spreadsheet and making use of that.
Cool. And then there was a question from Liluz. When does it make sense to do a beta and or A/B testing, I guess, opposed to just like pushing something?
Yeah, that's a great question because you're right. Not everything absolutely needs a beta all the time. It really depends on the risk, I would say, is the biggest factor. And if you feel like you got it right the first time and you have enough evidence of that, right? So, some things, if they're small in nature, small feature enhancements, or maybe you're just adding some configuration setting or something like that, don't always need a beta period. It's more about discoverability then. So, you could release it out to everybody, but make sure that again you have like proper documentation, maybe a pop-up or something that talks about this new feature was added just so you could see the adoption you want to see. But no, a beta is not always necessary.
Cool. Any other questions from the audience before we call it a day here? All right, well, it looks like that's all we have. So thanks again, Kim. I definitely learned a couple things here, and I'm definitely going to be sending the recording of this over to our product manager for the Galileo launch. Oh, I guess, sorry, one more question super quickly. Could you speak about market sizing for a product launch?
Market sizing. Yeah, so that's something you'll need to kind of gauge in the beginning. That all goes to that whole TAM, SAM, SOM type thing. And so that type of analysis you'll want it to do early in the process, like who are all the potential people that could potentially be in the pool for using this feature? Who are those that are most likely to use this feature? And then what percent do we actually think about using this feature? That's generally when you start to kind of take a look at that market size. And a lot of that's going to come to having to do research, right? You're not going to be able to get to that number just pulling like a number out of the hat and saying, I think it could work for this amount. I would recommend highly leveraging talking to internal folks to try to get a better idea, like your sales or your solution consultants or anything like that. They will have a lot of guidance for you on what they think the market appetite is for this and are a great source to also try to leverage as you start to plan your product launch.
Cool. Well, thanks again. And thanks everyone from the audience for joining. Stay tuned for a follow-up email with the recording and the link to Kim's checklist. And yeah, thanks again. Hope everybody has a good one. Thanks, Kim.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Bye, everyone.